All right, so today we're diving deep into something pretty relatable, I think, for a lot of us. Romantic relationships.
Ooh, yeah.
We are going to be exploring Chapter 11, Romantic Relationships, from Scott Howard Swain's book, A Practical Empath, Rewire Your Mind.
Okay.
And you're going to learn how to use Swain's Practical Empathy Practice System, or PEP, to build stronger and more authentic connections with your partner.
That's right. Swain really gets into the dynamics of romantic relationships, offering kind of a unique perspective that challenges some of the conventional wisdom that's out there.
Absolutely. And he starts the chapter off with a question that really made me stop and think. Is staying silent during disagreements really the best way to keep the peace?
It's a common approach, right? Avoid conflict, keep things harmonious. But Swain argues that consistently sweeping those disagreements under the rug can actually backfire and lead to resentment and a sense of fragility in the relationship.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. It's like you're constantly walking on eggshells. Eventually someone's bound to get stepped on. So how does Swain suggest we handle disagreements in a healthier way?
He suggests that instead of prioritizing comfort and safety over expressing your true feelings, you should try expressing disagreement with empathy. And what's fascinating here is that it's not about agreeing with your partner or giving in, but rather understanding and acknowledging their needs and values, even if you can't fulfill their specific request in that moment.
So it's like finding that sweet spot between honoring your own needs and being considerate of your partner's perspective. I'm intrigued already. Can you give us an example of how this might play out in a real-life situation?
Absolutely. So imagine your partner asks you to do something that you're not really up for, like going out with their friends when you'd rather stay home and recharge. Instead of just saying no, Swain suggests you try something like, hey, honey, are you wanting me to come with you tonight because you want some connection with me while you play cards with the gang?
Oh, I see what you mean. So you're acknowledging their need for connection, but also creating space to express your own needs.
Exactly. And if they say yes, you can acknowledge their needs and then express your own. You could say something like, thanks. It does sound fun. I'm in need of some rest tonight and wondering if you would be up for going by yourself this time or taking someone else.
Okay, that's a really helpful way to frame it. You're not just saying no, you're offering alternative solutions while also honoring your own needs.
Right. It's about communicating your needs clearly and respectfully, even when they conflict with your partners from there.
Now let's talk about something that can be a real relationship minefield. Jealousy. I'm sure we've all experienced those moments of insecurity and possessiveness at some point. How does Swain suggest we navigate those tricky waters?
Jealousy is a powerful emotion, and it can often lead to reactive and hurtful behavior. Instead of getting defensive or lashing out, Swain suggests trying to understand the underlying needs that are driving your partner's reaction.
So instead of, let's say, a more colorful response to seeing your partner checking someone else out, you try a more empathetic approach.
Precisely. Imagine responding with something like, hey, are you feeling hurt? Because you want more consideration and respect from me.
Wow, that completely changes the tone of the conversation. It shifts the focus from blame and accusation to understanding and empathy.
Exactly. Remember, it's not about condoning the behavior, but rather understanding the emotions behind it. This opens the door for a more productive and understanding dialogue.
This is so insightful. It seems like PEP can be applied to so many different situations. What about those really tough conversations where you might need to share difficult truths with your partner? How does PEP come into play then?
Swain talks about this idea of giving your partner an out, which essentially means creating a safe space for them to be honest with you, even when it's hard.
Yeah, creating that safe space sounds crucial, especially when you're dealing with sensitive or potentially hurtful information. I'm curious to hear more about this idea of giving an out. Tell me more.
Well, Swain shares this compelling story about how he helped his landlord, Albert, use PEP to address his wife's unspoken resentment. Albert was constantly complaining about his wife.
Oh, this sounds juicy. I'm all ears.
So Albert was constantly complaining about his wife. Swain encouraged him to try to use PEP to see things from her perspective, and turns out Albert's wife had put her dreams of going to university aside to start a family, and Albert never really considered how that might have impacted her.
Wow, that's a pretty big sacrifice.
Yeah.
I can see how she might harbor some resentment over that. Yeah. So how did Albert go about giving his wife an out?
Well, he took a deep breath and said something along the lines of, darling, remember when we first met? I was so overjoyed when I finally won your love. But you had dreams of going to university, and those were put aside. From your perspective, it could very much feel like I ruined your dreams. No wonder you were angry. I want you to know that I would do anything for you, including letting you go, if it would increase your happiness. If a break from this way of living would make you happy, then please tell me. Yes, I will feel hurt, but I will recover.
That's incredibly powerful.
Hmm.
He acknowledged his part in her unhappiness and gave her the freedom to choose what would make her happy, even if it meant a separation that must have been incredibly difficult for him to do.
It was a huge step for him. It's about letting go of your own need to control the situation and prioritizing your partner's well-being. Sometimes holding on can be more damaging than letting go.
That's such an important reminder. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is release your grip on a situation or relationship that is no longer serving you. And what happened with Albert and his wife? I'm dying to know.
She did end up asking for a separation, but here's the interesting part. Swain stayed in touch with Albert, and he reported that both he and his wife were actually much happier apart. They were even working on rebuilding their relationship from a healthier place.
That's amazing. It really highlights the idea that letting go, or at least letting go of certain expectations, can sometimes be the catalyst for growth and healing.
Absolutely, and it circles back to that initial question Swain poses about silence in relationships. Sometimes those unspoken truths are the very things that are holding us back from experiencing true intimacy and connection.
Okay, so we've talked about navigating disagreements, handling jealousy, and even letting go, but what about the day-to-day maintenance of a healthy relationship? What insights does Swain offer on that front?
This is where Swain introduces the concept of an emotional bank account. It's a brilliant analogy.
An emotional bank account. Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more.
Well, just like a regular bank account, an emotional bank account involves making deposits and withdrawals. Swain suggests that we should view our relationships through this lens. Deposits are those acts of kindness, appreciation, quality time. Anything that strengthens the bond and builds goodwill. Withdrawals, on the other hand, are those arguments, hurtful words, or instances of neglect that chip away at that foundation of trust and connection.
So the idea is that when your relationship faces inevitable challenges, a job loss, a health scare, or any other major life event, having a positive balance in your emotional bank account will make a world of difference. You've got that reservoir of goodwill to help you weather the storm.
Exactly. It's like having an emergency fund for your relationship.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
So how do we make those deposits into this emotional bank account? What are some practical examples?
Swain suggests making regular deposits by expressing appreciation for your partner and acknowledging the needs they meet for you. He gives the example of saying something like, "Hey, love, I want you to know some of the needs you often meet for me. Support mental and visual stimulation, beauty, sexual gratification, and expression, touch, nurturing, being heard, being understood." You could then share specific examples of things they do that meet those needs.
Wow, that's beautiful. It's like a direct love letter to your partner, expressing gratitude for all the ways they enrich your life.
And Swain emphasizes that these expressions of appreciation should be given freely without any expectations or strings attached. No requests, no buts, just genuine expressions of love and appreciation.
That's key, because as soon as you add a request, it feels less like a gift and more like a transaction.
You got it. Swain also talks about random acts of kindness, but with a twist.
A twist. Okay, now you've really got me curious. What's the twist?
He suggests tailoring those acts of kindness to your partner's preferences, drawing on the concept of the 5 love languages.
Ah, that makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
So if my partner's love language is acts of service, I might do the dishes without being asked. Or if their love language is words of affirmation, I might leave them a sweet note.
Precisely. And unless it's a surprise, Swain even recommends involving your partner in the decision-making process for these acts of kindness.
Why is that? I would think surprises would be more romantic.
It's all about avoiding those well-intentioned gestures that totally miss the mark. He gives a hilarious example of planning a surprise trip to the Bahamas only to find out your partner is allergic to salt water and their mom's funeral is that weekend.
Oh no, that's a disaster waiting to happen.
Yeah.
It's so easy to get caught up in our own ideas of what our partner would enjoy and totally miss the mark.
Exactly. It's about being thoughtful and intentional with our acts of kindness and making sure they truly align with our partner's needs and preferences.
This is all so insightful. I'm starting to see how PEP can be applied to so many aspects of a romantic relationship, from handling those big blow-up arguments to those smaller everyday interactions. It's like a framework for creating a more mindful and compassionate connection with your partner.
And there's even more to uncover. Swain also delves into the critical role of respect in a relationship, which can be such a make or break factor.
Respect is definitely a cornerstone of any healthy relationship. I'm interested to hear Swain's take on this.
He says that losing respect for yourself or your partner can be incredibly damaging to a relationship, maybe even irrevocably.
You know, that makes me think about the saying, charity begins at home. Could that apply to respect as well? Like maybe respecting ourselves is the foundation for respecting others.
That's a great connection. Swain actually talks about losing respect for ourselves first. He points out that neglecting our own well-being, whether emotional, physical, or even financial, can really chip away at our self-respect. And when we don't respect ourselves, it becomes much harder to truly respect others.
It's like we're projecting our own insecurities and lack of self-worth onto the relationship. I can definitely see how that could lead to problems.
Exactly. And it creates this vicious cycle where we might seek validation from our partner to make up for that lack of self-respect, which can then lead to neediness and dependence, further eroding their respect for us.
So it sounds like taking care of ourselves, both physically and mentally, is crucial for maintaining self-respect, which then allows us to show up in our relationships as our best selves.
It's all connected. And of course, there are ways we can lose respect for our partner as well. Swain highlights things like consistently breaking promises, being dishonest, or engaging in disrespectful behaviors.
I feel like those are pretty obvious red flags, but I think sometimes we can overlook those seemingly small transgressions, especially early on in a relationship when we're still in that honeymoon phase.
You're so right. We might justify them or brush them off as no big deal, but over time, those little cracks in the foundation can turn into major fault lines.
So it's about paying attention to those early warning signs and addressing them before they escalate into bigger issues. And Swain emphasizes that respect in a relationship is a two-way street.
Absolutely. He says respecting our partner means treating them the way they want to be treated, not necessarily how we would want to be treated.
It's about understanding and honoring their individual needs and preferences, even if they're different from our own.
That's a great way to put it, and Swain suggests that this requires observation, empathy, and clear communication. It's not just about grand gestures or pronouncements of love, but rather those smaller, everyday interactions where we show our partner that we see them, hear them, and respect their individuality.
It's almost like a constant dance of attunement, learning to move in sync with your partner's rhythms and preferences. And speaking of moving in sync, Swain also has a really interesting take on the golden rule.
Oh, yes. He actually disagrees with the traditional treat others as you would want to be treated approach.
Wait, really? I always thought the golden rule was, what, golden? Why does he disagree with it?
He makes a great point. He says it assumes that everyone wants to be treated the same way, which simply isn't true. We all have different needs, preferences, and love languages.
I never thought of it that way, but he's right. What works for one person might not work for another at all. So instead of trying to treat others how we would want to be treated, Swain suggests we focus on treating them how they want to be treated.
It's about recognizing that our partner is a separate individual with their own unique set of needs and desires, and honoring those differences is key to building a respectful and fulfilling relationship.
So it all goes back to empathy, putting ourselves in our partner's shoes and trying to see the world through their eyes.
Exactly. It's a journey of discovery, constantly learning and evolving alongside our partner. And speaking of evolving, Swain brings up this idea of finding a balance between having a spine and being a doormat in a relationship.
Oh, that's interesting. What does he mean by that?
He asks us to consider how often we do things at the request of our partner that we don't actually want to do. And more importantly, he encourages us to examine why we do those things. Is it because we truly want to please our partner? Or is it because we're afraid of conflict or worried about upsetting them?
That's a really important distinction. It's easy to fall into the trap of people-pleasing, especially in romantic relationships where we want to make our partner happy.
Yeah.
But if we're constantly silencing our own needs and desires, it can lead to resentment and a loss of self-respect.
And it can actually damage the relationship in the long run. It's about finding that sweet spot between being assertive and expressing our needs while also being respectful and considerate of our partner's needs.
It sounds like a delicate dance. But finding that balance is key to creating a relationship that is both authentic and sustainable.
Exactly. And this ties back to PEP. It's a framework for navigating these complexities with more awareness, compassion, and understanding.
You know, I'm really struck by how practical and applicable Swain's insights are. He doesn't just talk about these concepts in theory. He provides concrete examples and tools that we can use in our everyday lives.
That's what makes this book so valuable. It's not just another self-help book that leaves you feeling inspired, but lost on how to actually implement the ideas. Swain gives you the roadmap.
I love that. So as we wrap up our deep dive into romantic relationships through the lens of PEP, what's one key takeaway you'd like to leave our listeners with today?
I think it's this. Swain challenges us to move beyond those surface-level disagreements and knee-jerk reactions, and instead focus on truly understanding the underlying needs and values that drive our partner's behavior. When we can tap into that level of empathy, we create a foundation for a more authentic, compassionate, and ultimately more fulfilling relationship.
That's beautifully said. And I think it's a great reminder that relationships take work, But with the right tools and a commitment to understanding, we can create something truly special. So as you go about your day today, I encourage you to consider how you can apply PEP to deepen your connection with your partner. Maybe try expressing your needs more clearly, or take a moment to truly listen to and acknowledge your partner's needs, or maybe give them an out today and see what unfolds.
What a beautiful challenge. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. It's been a pleasure exploring these ideas with you.
And as always, thank you for listening. We'll be back next week with another fascinating deep dive.